Alright, in this video we're going to look at the rubric feature in MyOpenMath and WAMAP and look at how to set them up and how to use them. So I have a couple questions in this assessment, both of which are file upload questions. The first of which is a problem where they're supposed to set up an equation and then solve it, and the second one is just a basic, solve an inequality problem. So to set up a rubric, I'm going to go to Action, Change Settings, and down here I'm going to look for Use Scoring Rubric. And I have several that I've already created for other purposes, but I need a new one for this question, so I'm going to go ahead and click in here. Now it's worth noting that rubrics are universal, so they're associated with your account, so you can use the same rubric in any course. I acknowledge, admittedly, that means if you use a different rubric for each question, you're going to end up with a very long list of rubrics. But there may be cases where you can use the same rubric for a lot of different questions, which is why that it is set up that way. Anyway, so let's see. So we're going to call this one I don't know. I'm going to be lazy right now, just call it question 1 rubric, but of course you should name it something more relatable. There's a couple different kinds of rubrics. The two big categories are score breakdown and score total. And we're going to start with a score breakdown one, because for this first problem, this was the set up an equation and solve problem, there are sort of distinctive steps to the problem. And so I'm going to use a rubric to break down those steps into smaller pieces. So the first piece might be something like define variables, and the second part might be set up algebraic equation, and then third step might be to solve the equation, and last step might be to write the answer in words. Now over here, if you want to leave yourself a note as to what these rubric items are about, you can put it here. This part here will end up in the feedback that students see. So you're going to want to create this as student-friendly language, and then if you need to give yourself a reminder about what you're looking for, you can put it here in these boxes. And now we're going to do portion of score, and you can either do points or percents. It ends up all getting scaled anyway, so using percents is probably the safest thing, but again, you can use points if you want to. So let's say I'm going to give 10% for defining the variables, 50% for setting up the equation, or how about 40, 40, and 10. There we are. Alright, so I've set up my rubric, and I will go ahead and hit create. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and set up the other one. So I'm going to add another rubric, and I'm going to call this the question 2 rubric. Now for this one, I'm going to use a score total rubric. And so in the score breakdown one that we did before, we're going to assign a point value for or score on each of the rubric items, right? Because we're saying that these things make up the entirety of the problem. For a score total rubric, this is just one rubric item will be selected, and the portion of score gives the final score. So this is kind of a cheater way of coming up with your own sort of pre-canned feedbacks. So you might say something like, great work, and that gets 100%. And then there could be a second one, so you're trying to capture sort of common mistakes here that you would want to give feedback for. So we could say something like, good start, but you forgot to break apart the inequality, or break apart the absolute value. And for that, maybe I'm going to give them 70% of the full score. And third part, third feedback might be something like you can't just ignore the absolute value, and I'm going to give them like 50% for that. Anyway, so there's maybe I'll have one other that's like good but small arithmetic error, and I'll give like 90% for that. All right, so I'm going to come up with these score options, right? And now I'm going to go ahead and create that rubric. All right, so now that we've made our rubrics, we have to go back to our assessment, again, under the settings, and I'm now going to choose that question 1 rubric there, and for the second one, I am going to, again, do the same thing and select the question 2 rubric. Okay, so now I have my rubric set up. Now my students can go take the assessment, and then we'll see what we can do with these. All right, so I pulled up a student's work in the grade book, and you'll notice that next to the grade entry box here is the rubric icon. And so to use this rubric, we will click the rubric icon, and then there are those rubric items we defined. And this particular problem is worth 10 points, so that 10, 40, 40, 10% translate to points. And now we can go ahead and score the student. So I could either say, let's just give them full credit, or I can say, hey, you defined your variables, you set up your equation, but you didn't, and you solved it, but you didn't write your answer in words. Or maybe they partially did this, and so I'm going to give them a different score. So you use the rubric to calculate their score, and then once you are done with that, you hit the clear existing and record. That's going to clear out whatever's in the feedback box already. So if you don't want to do that, you can just hit record, but I'm going to hit clear existing and record, and you'll notice the score gets recorded there and the rubric items get added into the feedback. And now if you want to elaborate on the feedback, of course, you can go in here and edit it however you'd like. Okay, so that was the first rubric, which remember was the score breakdown rubric, where for each rubric item, we choose how many points we're going to award for that category of the rubric. Here's the second rubric, and so if I click my rubric thing, you'll notice now that I have those options that we selected, that we came up with, but we can only choose one of them. Right? So we're not breaking down the score into little pieces. We're just using the rubric as a way to say, here's how many points you got, and here's the feedback I want to give you. So if this student had, done a great start but forgot to break apart the absolute value, I'd pick that option, hit record, and it's going to record the score and their and the feedback. And that's a mistake. Try to figure out what caused that, but there we go. And that's the idea of rubrics. Again, the sort of score breakdown rubric or the score total rubric.